it's that time of the league again. There's a new Gauntlet coming up, and this time it's the Runic Strife Gauntlet, which looks like it will have the most brutal and unforgiving campaign that we've ever seen in the history of the Gauntlet event. The idea of the Runic Strife Gauntlet, according to Zizaran, is a grueling campaign followed by maps which are relatively similar to base game difficulty with only a handful of extra modifiers, and then pinnacle and uber pinnacle bosses which are exceedingly difficult. So here's the modifiers for each zone in the Gauntlet based on area level, and in this video I'm going to be focusing in on Act 1 because this is going to be the part of the campaign which kills the most characters, is going to be the roadblock that stops players from progressing, and in a lot of cases this will be where many players just quit the Gauntlet. Ever since GGG reworked Act 1, it has been notoriously difficult in comparison to the rest of the acts in the game, and that's just the base game. The Gauntlet turns this difficulty up to 11, and the Runic Strife Gauntlet will be no exception. So in Acts 1 through 5, these will be the modifiers attached to each zone. Let's briefly cover each modifier. Monsters take 20% less damage. This means that you need to deal 25% more damage than you otherwise would have to kill monsters. Then there's 30% increased monster damage and 10% monster haste. These two modifiers are generally the least concerning of the bunch, but they kind of amplify the danger of the other mods, which we'll get to in just a moment. You want to ensure that you're always moving to avoid monster hits as much as possible, and just keep in mind that haste modifier with monster animations being sped up slightly. And then there's two nasty modifiers at the end here. Monsters fire 2 additional projectiles, and monsters penetrate 20% of elemental resistances. Okay, so as I mentioned, the increased monster damage and haste modifiers amplify the danger of these ones. When you get off the beach at the beginning, you'll have no elemental resistances, so the pen mod alone will make monsters deal 20% more damage to you with elemental hits. And you may think that's not too bad, but the increased monster damage is a multiplier with the penetration mod. And together, these mods will make monsters deal 56% more damage with elemental hits against characters with no resistances. And the trouble here is that, comparatively with the amount of damage that you would be taking without these modifiers in play, this only gets worse the more resistance you acquire. For example, if you have 30% resistance, you would be taking 70% of the damage of incoming elemental hits. So let's say you take a hit of 100 cold damage in the base game, this will be reduced to 70 cold damage. But with these mods in play, you'll be taking 117 cold damage, or an effective 67% more damage. And with 75% resistance, that damage would only be dealing 25 cold damage in the base game without mods. But with those mods in play, it's dealing 59 cold damage, or an effective 136% more damage. That is absolutely brutal. Now, this isn't to suggest that you shouldn't be obtaining elemental resistances, far from it actually, because you absolutely must focus on doing that, especially cold resistance early on. But it's important to recognise that even with a decent amount of resistance, these modifiers are devastating and you need to be really careful. Then of course there's the monster LMP. Projectiles are very dangerous, and I'm going to highlight some of the worst offenders in a moment, but this one kind of goes back to that haste modifier and ensuring you are moving and avoiding getting shotgunned by a bunch of hits all at once. Okay, so for this video, the focus is on Act 1. Let's go through each area and discuss some monsters that you need to be on the lookout for because they become extremely scary with these mods. Alright, you get off the beach, you're on the coast. Just run through this zone and don't look back. I can't recommend killing anything here. You can always farm some levels in the tidal island if you need to, but be wary of these fire breather cannibals in this zone. They will do absurd amounts of damage in the Gauntlet. Now, in the mudflats, the danger is always the rowers, of course. One thing that I absolutely recommend here is ensuring that you're either using a shield or you're dual wielding. Dual wielding was buffed in 3.25 to provide 20% attack block, so it's almost as good as using a shield. And being able to block 20 or 25% of those rower charges could be the difference between living or dying. But generally, try to avoid the charges and try to pull as few rowers at a time as possible to avoid getting swarmed. However, one of the very scary monsters in this zone is actually these Tide Striders, which are melee monsters, but when you are at range from them, they fire these cold damage projectiles. These will absolutely destroy you in the Gauntlet, watch out for them. Next is the Submerged Passage, and once again, these monsters that fire cold projectiles at range are the biggest threat. Try to move in a way that allows you to ball monsters up so that you won't get swarmed when you're moving through tight passageways. That's usually one fast way to die in this zone, is to just get body blocked in one of the small passages in this zone and then get shotgunned to death. The next zone is the Ledge. Do not walk into these side passages where there's just a bunch of goats beckoning you to enter. Do not do it. Be wary of the skeletal archers here, and once again the fire breather cannibals. Next is the Climb. Take this zone slow because it's quite easy to get overrun by goats. In particular, watch out for the Goat Shaman fireball projectiles. These will be covering the screen in the Gauntlet because of the LMP modifier, and they're going to really hurt. Try to range these mobs down rather than moving close to them. Now, in the lower prison, the skeletal archers are dealing lightning damage, so you need to watch out for those. But these monsters are extremely weak. Even in the Gauntlet, they'll die very quickly, but be aware of moving into a room with multiple of these skeletons, as they'll just shotgun you down. Try to line of sight them in this zone, so that you're only fighting a few monsters at a time. In the upper prison, you're once again on the lookout for skeletons, but this time they have cold and lightning projectiles, and similar to the Goat Shamans from the Climb, when you encounter these monsters in large packs, the projectiles are going to be everywhere because of the LMP mod. Again, line of sight and good movement, you should be able to deal with these quite easily. Then we have Brutus. Just take your time, be aware of the 10% haste modifier when timing his attacks, and use portals to refill flasks if needed. Obviously, avoid the slam and the wave slam ability. The next zone is Prisoner's Gate. This one is dangerous because of the amount of elemental damage the monsters deal here. You have these goats that use a spark ability, and the dogs, the Flame Hellions, they drop burning ground on death, which isn't affected by elemental penetration or anything like that, but you still don't want to be standing in it. The haste modifier in particular is scary in this zone because the packs here are already typically quite fast. Kill packs one at a time to avoid over-aggroing a huge amount of Hellions. And in the ship graveyard, the next zone, there's more rowers, but these are not the scariest monsters in this zone. Once again, there are monsters here which look very similar to the ones in earlier acts, but they're a bit different. Instead of a cold projectile that they fire out when they're at range from you, they use a cold snap spell, and this is absolutely devastating. If you get a pack of these all hitting you at the same time with that spell, you are pretty much dead. These monsters are very slow, just avoid them and move past them. In the first zone of the Merveil Cavern, just be aware of these drifting eye monsters that use a lightning damage spell. They take a while to charge up, but with the haste modifier it can be quite easy to mistime it. There's also the Sea Witches. Try to move beyond them when they use their whale ability, it will slow you down and make you more prone to being hit. And in the second area of the Merveil Caverns, this one's a bit more dangerous than the first. You're on the lookout for the smaller Sea Witches that are red in colour. They're called Unstable Lava. They run at you and explode for fire damage. Just do not get hit by this. It deals crazy damage. Even in the base game, it deals insane damage. It's almost certain death in the Gauntlet when you get swarmed by these. So move away from them, kill them quickly because they're very weak. There's also these things which fire lightning projectiles. They're usually not a problem, but are a bit scary with Gauntlet mods. And finally, for Act 1, it's Merveil. Now, by this point, or likely a lot earlier than this, you want to ensure you have capped cold resistance. And you can make use of the vendor recipe, which requires an iron ring plus a blue gem to generate a sapphire ring. You want to be keeping any iron rings you find for that purpose. Now for Merveil, her cold projectiles are going to be dealing a ton of damage in Phase 1, and in the second phase you want to watch out for those exploding, unstable lava minions that are spawned whenever she teleports. They die very easily, so try to focus on them when they spawn and use your movement skill to avoid getting hit by the explosion if they make it into melee range with you. Now, we can talk about Merveil for what we know about in the Gauntlet, but there's another thing going on that we don't really know anything about. Just listen to this.
For the first time ever, the Gauntlet is going to have a unique twist. The campaign bosses, pinnacle bosses, and other areas of the game might have different abilities, switched abilities, or multiple bosses together. We don't fully know what is going to be happening. Even I don't know, because for this one, we're letting Neon cook and play around with it to make a really truly memorable event.
So Merveil may be joined by Dominus, for example, or perhaps she'll even have Dominus's Hand of God ability. We really don't know what's going to be happening, and there's really no way to prepare for this other than being overgeared, overleveled, and just being ready for anything that could be thrown at you. Now I'm going to be doing some follow-up videos for the other acts. They'll likely be a bit more condensed. I just wanted to do a whole video on Act 1 because I felt like this is one of those acts that just kind of stops a lot of people in the Gauntlet, and it's just absolutely brutal this time around. But that's going to be it for this one, guys. I hope you are excited for the Gauntlet. I think it's going to be a really fun one to watch, and I'm looking forward to jumping into it on September 26th. Thanks for watching this video, and thank you for your ongoing support. As always, stay tuned and stay safe.